Welcome to Echoes of History. Deep beneath the lavish splendor of the Vatican City lies a sprawling subterranean fortress, a labyrinth of shelves extending over 50 miles. This is the Vatican Apostolic Archive, a vault holding the most intimate secrets, the most ruthless decisions, and the darkest moral compromises of an institution that has shaped the world for 2 millennia. This archive is not merely a library, it is a meticulously catalogued history of power, doctrine, and diplomacy. Officially, it is open to scholars, but its true, unvarnished contents remain guarded by time, bureaucracy, and intentional obscurity. Today, we step beyond the velvet rope. This is the realistic, often unsettling story of the Vatican's hidden files. The secrets they contain, the global conflicts they expose, and the agonizing truths they hide about the Church's role in history's most brutal chapters. The Apostolic Archive's origins are rooted in the necessity of governance. Beginning in the early 17th century, Pope Paul XXXV decided to consolidate the Church's vast documentation, effectively creating the central memory bank of the papacy. Unlike public libraries, this collection was designated Archivum Secretum, the secret archive, not in the sense of modern espionage, but as a private reserve for the Pope and his curia, meant only for internal use and review. This collection, dating back over 1200 years, contains far more than theological treatises. It is the raw material of geopolitical history, treaties between empires, bulls of excommunication, intimate correspondence between popes and kings, and the chilling records of the Roman Inquisition. The sheer volume is a weapon of information asymmetry. While scholars technically gain access to documents up to the end of a previous pope's term, a rule historically applied with glacial slowness, the archive's true power lies in its organization, or lack thereof for the outsider. Finding a specific document can take years, even decades. This structural obscurity is a deliberate defense mechanism. By making access functionally impossible due to time constraints and the sheer weight of disorganized material, the Church maintains effective control over its own narrative. The Vatican has always understood that history is authority. By controlling the evidence, the primary source material, it controls the debate surrounding its moral and political actions throughout history. The archive is, in this ruthless sense, an architecture built to preserve not merely records but the papacy's geopolitical image. The most morally challenging records lie within the archives of the Holy Office, formerly the Roman Inquisition. These documents are not just bureaucratic records, they are the intimate, brutal details of the Church's war against intellectual and spiritual dissent. For centuries, these files contained the transcripts of interrogations, accusations of heresy, and the eventual judgments passed upon figures deemed enemies of the faith. Perhaps the most famous case is that of Galileo Galilei. The archive holds the original transcripts of his trial, the formal recantation he was forced to sign, and the documents that condemned the heliocentric theory as formally heretical. These files expose the Church's willingness to prioritize dogmatic certainty over empirical truth, silencing one of the greatest scientific minds of his age. Beyond Galileo, these dossiers detail the ruthless pursuit of supposed witches, heretics, and political adversaries across Europe. The Inquisition records offer a terrifying insight into the institutional use of fear, psychological pressure, and judicial process to enforce monolithic thought. For historians, this access is crucial. It allows us to realistically assess the Church's judicial power, revealing that their theological disputes were often intertwined with naked political ambitions and the systematic suppression of local authority. The archive does not just record history, it records the cost of absolute spiritual power. The most contentious and politically charged documents relate to the tenure of Pope Pius XVII during the Second World War and the Holocaust. For decades, the Vatican faced intense global scrutiny regarding its official stance, or lack thereof, on the Nazi genocide. Critics accused Pius XVIII of maintaining a diplomatic silence to preserve the institutional integrity of the Church, effectively failing to condemn the mass murder of European Jews. In 2020, Pope Francis granted unprecedented access to the archives covering Pius XV's pontificate, 1939 to 1958. The initial findings have proven complex and, for many, deeply disappointing. While some documents reveal smaller, decentralized efforts by individual clergy to save Jewish lives, the core diplomatic correspondence largely confirms the Vatican's consistent institutional policy of public neutrality. The crucial question remains unanswered. What did Pope Pius XII know, and when did he know it? The archives show a careful tightrope walk, a diplomatic calculus designed to avoid alienating Nazi Germany or Fascist Italy, thereby protecting church assets and personnel in occupied territories. The ruthless reality of the archives' release is that while it reveals the immense diplomatic pressure on the Holy See, it fails to produce the smoking gun, a direct sweeping condemnation of the genocide by Pius XIII. The current official narrative therefore remains largely intact, a policy driven by institutional pragmatism over moral outrage. The historical verdict is agonizing. The silence of the papacy during the Holocaust is documented not by what the archive reveals, but often by what it conspicuously lacks: a forceful, unequivocal moral stand. The Apostolic Archive is more than a dusty tomb of paper. It is the living proof that historical power relies on controlled memory. The archive's contents are the echoes of history at their most raw and powerful. The secrecy surrounding the files has long fueled theories about hidden texts and suppressed historical facts, from the suppression of Gnostic Gospels to the Church's financial entanglements. While many of these sensational claims are unsubstantiated, the fact that the Church historically maintained such rigorous control over its own narrative lends credibility to the persistent suspicion. The Vatican's archives teach us a final, chilling lesson about institutional authority. Information control is perpetual. The contemporary Curia continues to employ the same fundamental strategies of its medieval predecessors, managing the release of information not on a schedule dictated by historical honesty, but by a timeline dictated by political necessity and institutional survival. The true significance of the Vatican's secret files is their unflinching testimony to the realpolitik of faith. They reveal an institution that, even while pursuing divine missions, was driven by the same human impulses that motivate all great powers: territorial ambition, strategic maneuvering, and the ultimate preservation of its own vast authority. The archive is a mirror. It shows us not just the history of the Church, but the history of how all power systems work to shape the past to secure their future. Thank you for joining us on Echoes of History. If you've been intrigued by the hidden forces that command our world, be sure to subscribe and like this video. We'll delve into another chapter of Untold history in our next installment.